anybody who missed it. And we're going to start off with Timo, who wins the award for most dedicated to being at the meeting, because it is currently 3 a.m. his time.
Go Sydney, best place to be. Yeah, thank you for having me on. I don't know, I was just brought up the other day that I was using Agones in a different way, and you guys were saying I should talk about it a bit. So a little bit about what we do. It's like, so the game is called A Township Tale, and it's a VR game, which is a multiplayer game, and we're trying to like build small communities. So we're trying to keep the server size down, and we're trying to give everyone kind of access to servers. And with that in mind, it means that we've got a lot of servers out there which don't get played on for most of the time. So we're just trying to keep those costs down, but still have everyone be able to join their server whenever they want to. So that's where kind of Agones came into play. I can actually show you guys a little bit of how that works, because it's just like managing, it's pretty vanilla Agones, but then my own stuff on top of that to kind of shut them down and keep the costs down. If you want to see that.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So just to ask you a question, so you have these sort of small communities, right? So there's some maybe 16 players on a server, I think you said in the issue. Are those people pinned to that server? Like if I join and I'm on a server and then I join again later, do I always go back to the same server, or do I get put on another little server with 16 different people?
It's kind of like a Minecraft scenario where people just choose the world that they want to join. So we've got like a server board that you have in the main menu, and it's just got, first of all, in the moment, it's got a bunch of public servers that we've put up. So one for each region, like Australia, EU, and US. But then now we've also given people the ability to host their own. And then it kind of works off a system that I've just rolled out, which is a group system to maybe clan people together. And they join that group, and then they see that server on the server board.
So basically they get permission to see or access.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And then they can ban each other and stuff like that, or invite friends. But yeah, from then on, it's literally just connecting them through getting an allocation from Agones for that server with the server ID. They get pumped through to that, and they play on it for a little bit. And once the player count reaches 0, the server itself does the work in the moment of going, okay, I've got no one playing, I'm gonna wait for 5 minutes. If no one else joins, I shut myself down. But initially, my plan was to maybe have that a top-down process, so that I would mark the server as having 0 players, and then there would be some kind of a matchmaking or allocating service which would go over the servers. I think, if I remember correctly, I saw you write something about exposing player counts or players as a resource or as something in the Agones system itself.
Yep.
Which sounded pretty cool. I'm not sure what the plans there were, or if that was a thing.
There's a couple of issues that I wrote that are 3/4 fleshed out. So if you check the GitHub.
So are they going along the lines of that?
Yeah. So player tracking, being able to track who's connected, who's not connected, that kind of stuff, and how that gets stored is probably still a conversation that needs to happen. But yeah, if you can check it all out on the issues.
Yeah. The only hurdle really I had to jump through was getting the persistent save files through. So each region just has a network storage drive that all of them are attached to, and then when the request comes in for someone to join world, like Timo's world, they Agones would come in, allocate that server goes, okay, I'm now Timo's world, I have to pull the save file which is associated with Timo's world, and then it copies it onto its local storage, and off it goes. And that process takes 10 seconds or something when it's a cold start. And from then on, when the second person joins the server, it's already running. So at that point, it can just go, I can connect you straight away. So it's 0 seconds of connection there.
Very cool.
Sweet. Any questions or anything about that? Do you want to go into detail?
When you allocate your game servers, are they just like self-allocating as soon as they spin up? Is that what they're doing, or something else?
So no, they all get ready, so they load a bunch of the world. And the reason we're doing that is because I think at the moment it takes like 2 minutes or something from just starting up to load a bunch of the prefabs and stuff that we're using Unity to set everything up, and then it marks itself as ready once that's done. And from that point on, it's ready to become my world, become your world, become whatever world.
Got it. That makes sense. And then once it's loaded up its assets, I'm guessing you're setting a label or something on it so that it's like, hey.
Yeah, exactly. I just use the label system, and then that's it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm clear. So the servers are ready once they can serve any game, and then they basically load a save file for a particular world.
Exactly.
You use that via label, you were saying?
Pardon? What was the last thing?
You pick the save file to load based on a label that gets set on the game server. Is that how you were associating those two things?
Yeah, exactly. So they just, because I'm saying to my API, I'm saying I want to join Timo's world, and that is ID 123, and then it goes, okay, you become server 123, and it internally goes, let me go to the save file, get that, and it's just got the label on it. So if a feature joins, it just goes, or like obviously the first thing it does is check if there's already something with a label 123.
But the game server binary itself is sort of in a ready state where it knows how to dynamically fetch that save game, apply it, and sort of become world 123, right?
Yeah, and the good thing we have going on is that pretty much we all use the same map. So every world has the same base map, and then it's obviously the content that sits in that world that's slightly different. Like people's save files are different, and there's a lot of world state that gets saved, but it's the same map overall. Like even though because it's an open world map, and we're only making one of these, there's no point making multiple open world maps. It's a lot of work for a 6-person team, really. Yeah. Awesome.
Cool. Anybody else have questions?
No. Cool. Yeah, like I do want to, like, I think this is a bit of a different use case from the other stuff I've seen. I feel like it could even be carried over in a more generic sense to different games, like a Minecraft or something.
Yeah, we've definitely had discussions in the past about sort of how do you support a Minecraft-like thing, right? And I think it's really interesting to hear about how you're doing something very similar to that. I think that's a pretty common use case for people, where you have, like, there are lots of games obviously that have these sort of ephemeral, like they're all exactly the same and they come and they go sort of binaries, but there are also a lot of spaces where you want to have something a little more persistent. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Cool, thank you.
Sweet.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And we will record the rest in case you want to go back to bed.
That's it for a bit, I'll say. I've got to finish my tea first and that'll be right.
There you go. There you go. The important thing.
Exactly.
Looks like next on the agenda was Cami.
Yes, hello. So we are now globally launched on Snake Rivals, so everyone around the world can download it. So go check it.
Very cool.
I have a few questions that we have noticed now that we have a lot of people playing and a lot of server action going on, is that we sometimes receive errors when we change anything on the game server using the REST API. So it would fail to update the label, to update the status, and it happens a lot. And I'm really not sure, like, what am I doing wrong?
So you're not doing anything wrong, and that error should happen all the time. So Kubernetes itself has a thing inside it for all its resources, such that if somebody else changes its state, like you're grabbing the state from the REST API and then making changes and then applying them. If somebody does something in the middle of that, such that has changed something else before you come over, excuse me, it will throw that error and be like, somebody else already did this, you need to retry. So you need to like go back through and like grab it again and then apply the changes. And so like if you look at the logs for Agones itself, you'll see that error constantly because it happens constantly. There's a couple of things you can do to mitigate that. One is do some sort of retry backoff type scheme. So there's that. If you're doing straight updates, that's probably your best bet. If you're taking the whole object, making changes, and then pushing the whole object back, then you can do that. There's a bunch of you're using Node, so that doesn't help you. I was going to say there's Go libraries that help you do that really easily, that are part of Kubernetes itself. The other thing you can do is you can send patch requests, which will get that occasionally can get rejected. In theory, according to the docs, I think Robert, you can probably confirm this for me. Like we'll say that, where you basically like, I just want to change this one little bit, and generally they get pushed straight through. So if you're like, like whatever state this is in, don't care, change these labels to this. You can send patch requests and do it that way instead.
I think the issue is that I'm not using Kubernetes API. I'm using the sidecar, Agones sidecar to do it. So within the game server, I'm using Agones sidecar to set it. So can't really quite patch it. Have to use the SDK provided or the rest.
So this is coming from the SDK.
Yes, that's right. So the Agones.
Oh, that's not good.
So
can you file bugs, please?
Oh, sure. I have. It happens a lot on the sidecar. So, for example, the most prominent was we were trying to use allocation, new feature in the REST API.
Yeah.
So game server would self-allocate, and it would quite often fail. Almost always would fail to mark self-allocated and say the object has been already modified.
That's strange. Okay, they should, because I'm pretty sure there's retry logic in there for that kind of scenario. But yes, please file bugs if that's happening.
Okay.
And we'll look into it.
Well, good to know that's a bug. And
okay, I read REST API and assumed it was the Kubernetes REST API, not the SDK server REST API.
The next thing that I wanted to bring up is that we use default settings for the updates. So when we update Fleet, we use default setting, which is specified to be rolling update. And what we notice that every time we deploy a fleet, it happens so that no one trying to get a game can get a game, because all the games servers shut down and bring up new ones. I thought it would slowly shut down some of them and bring some of the new version on, but it seems like it shuts down all of them. Now, my question is, perhaps we only have 5 ready at all times, and 5 is probably not that much. And so it happens too quick. But the problem is we would like it slower transition. And we are using rolling update.
I assume we have max search and max unavailable parameters with that, Mark?
Yes.
It's all set to
it seems like
25.
Yeah, so if you have 5 ready and like the surge and unavailable are set so that they don't sort of line up with your parameters, then you could definitely see it happen too fast, right? If you wanted to go one at a time, you can set max unavailable to 1, and that will severely rate limit the rate at which you do a rolling update, because it'll say, if there's one thing that's unavailable, I won't kill the next one until that one comes back, right? And then also if you set max surge, you can tell it provision a new one before killing the old one. So you can say, I want to have 5 ready, so I can set max surge to 1. It'll create a 6th, before dropping the old one. Right?
Yeah. So, or you could max surge up a little higher, even maybe, or something.
Right. So I guess I would recommend not just using the defaults, right? Because it sounds like they aren't working for you, and actually setting those parameters for the rolling update.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I'm just trying to remember. Where are we? Deployment strategy. Yeah, and those max surge and max, just to be 100% clear, the max surge and max, the other one, can either be percentages or numbers. So it's whichever one works better for you.
Cool. That's why I was so confused. Why are you saying me 1, telling me 1? Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, we actually use exactly the same, type as just Kubernetes deployments. So it's exactly the same deployment operation there.
And I think I don't have anything else for today. Thank you.
Cami, going back to the first one, so you guys are using the REST API from your game to the sidecar.
Yes.
And then the error that you're seeing, is that the error coming back over the REST API, or you're seeing that error in the logs of the sidecar?
Yes, that's the logs in the sidecar.
Okay, but the REST API, is it also returning you an error like failed, and then you're going and looking at the sidecar logs to see why? Is that what's going on?
I think we're catching it. So we just silently catching it so it doesn't crash the server. But we've noticed that it doesn't allocate self, so we started looking into it, and therefore we found that it happens a lot when we try to update labels or even set it to ready. When we try to like request it ready, it happens a lot then too.
So
but
it should, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
The reason why ready all gets through anyways is because I keep bombarding ready until it returns me ready. So I keep retrying.
So, I mean, that error should show because it's quite possible that it's doing that thing where it's like, hey, but it should retry up into the point where it's like done. So that's weird, for lack of a better term. So I have to look into it, see what's going on there. We do have end-to-end tests for those, and they're not particularly flaky. So I'm curious. I'm wondering if maybe they go into some back-off state that's a bit slower than they could be or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to also think like what else could be, like the error is basically saying something else is modifying the same Kubernetes object that you are trying to modify.
Yeah.
Right? So like what else would be touching that object at the same time?
That's another interesting question.
Like the Agones controller seems like the most likely culprit, right? Unless you guys are running some other custom controllers that are twiddling labels or anything else on the game server objects.
The only time we do that is when we allocate it with the matchmaker. So when we mark it allocated with the matchmaker, that's the only time we edit it outside the game server. The rest of the time, it gets edited from within the game server.
Yeah, I think the contention seems like it's then likely from like the controller, like setting status or something on the game server, right? And having the race occur. But it seems like it seems odd to me that it's happening that frequently, right? Like I would expect that to happen occasionally, but that shouldn't be the normal case.
Okay.
Because everything goes into a queue. I'm literally just digging into it because I'm curious. Because there's a queue and it's an event that goes through, and then if it doesn't happen, then it goes back in the queue.
I can get more better logs.
Yeah, I'd love to see the full logs if you want to submit if you can grab the whole log for the sidecar, that'd be really handy.
Yeah, and if there's anything sensitive in there that you don't want to just paste on GitHub, you can just send it to Mark privately, probably too.
Sure. Thanks.
Excuse me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think trying to reproduce that and write a test for it would be awesome. So yeah, any information we can get to try and reproduce it would be really helpful. All right.
Robbie, I think
should we move on to the next thing?
Yeah, I think you have pretty much the majority of the rest of the stuff.
We've got some stuff in the middle there.
So Robbie all day.
I stuck a bunch of things on the agenda yesterday that I wanted to talk about. The first one was just sort of an FYI. The 1.1 release candidate was cut this week. It was cut on Tuesday. And the 1.1 release is scheduled for next week. As sort of a PSA, I've been making some changes to the SDK such that you should consider updating your games to use the 1.1 SDK between this release and the next release. The reason is that we are going to change the default ports that the sidecar is listening on. And if you're using the 1.1 SDK, your code won't need to be changed. It will just pick up the new ports. We'll have some documentation, but there'll be a way to make it backwards compatible if you're not using the 1.1 SDK as well. But the reason we're changing the ports is because we were previously binding to very high numbered ports, which are ephemeral ports, which means that they can be used by any process. And some folks were reporting bugs that there were cases where they were getting used by other processes and they were seeing things crash. And so we're going to switch it to bind to low-level ports, which we expect there not to be any port conflicts on, while also giving you the option to pick your own port if that low-level port that's the default happens to be in use for some other reason. So yeah, the 1.1 SDKs will all dynamically configure the port that they're connecting to that will automatically match the port in the sidecar that it's binding to. So that would be your sort of easiest thing there is to make sure you're compiling your games with the 1.1 SDK before you upgrade to the 1.2 release.
Yeah.
Sort of along this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say as well, like if you're rolling your own SDK, like I think there for Super Solid you are, there's going to be an environment variable that'll get passed through. So if you just start using that now, which is be the default now, then it'll just automatically kick through as we roll to new versions. So nothing will actually change.
Right. And the documentation for the REST API describes that, although it's not live yet because we haven't pushed the 1.1 release. The next thing was I wanted to sort of briefly bring up sort of a discussion. We don't have to resolve this today, but to talk a little bit about how we want to support releases, right? So we've cut 1.0, so we've said, we're going to provide compatibility between releases. We think this is ready for games to be run, in GA. But now we're going to keep cutting a new release every 6 weeks, right? We're cutting the 1.1 release next week. 6 weeks later, we'll have a 1.2 release. Pretty soon we're going to have quite a few 1.x releases. From sort of the community standpoint, like how long do we want to support each release, right? So I just threw out there, 1.0 because that's the first one. Like how long do we support it? Do we stop supporting it as soon as we cut 1.1? Do we support it for a couple of releases? How are we willing to backport bug fixes, security patches? How much? Yeah, Mark's got a good question. How long do we keep documentation up on the website? I think these are all questions that we didn't have to talk about when we were cutting 0.x releases, because we could just sort of tell everybody it's still under development, right? Go ahead and just keep using the latest. But April, you're making some background noise. But now that we have these stable releases, I assume people will start to depend upon them and maybe not upgrade quite as quickly as our 6-week release cadence. And we need to figure out how to deal with that. So if anybody has thoughts or, from the game operator's standpoint, like sort of requirements, if you will, of like, or suggestions of what you would like, then that would be really helpful.
I guess personally we make releases every sprint, and our sprints are about, between a month and 6 weeks. And we usually update all the dependencies at that time before each release. So I guess for us, it's 6 weeks is fine. We're going to probably be updated every time you release something new. But I don't know. I guess if someone has longer release schedules, then probably supporting LTS version would make more sense. Choosing the LTS version and support that one for longer.
I guess kind of what I'm getting at, like if everybody does something similar to what you guys do, then we don't need to pick an LTS version, and we can just tell everybody like, hey, you should be on the latest or N-1 release, and we'll support 2 releases at a time, and maybe that makes everybody happy, right? So I think this is kind of where I'm wondering, like, do people need an LTS version? Or are we okay not having one, at least for a while? It certainly, I think, is lower burden on developers for adding features, fixing bugs. If we don't have to pick a release and backport everything, right, that'll be a lot easier. It lowers sort of the testing burden. Like if we have an LTS release, we need to basically double all of our CI so that we're always testing the LTS release and master. We might want to also do that for N and N-1 as well anyway, but these are all sort of things to consider.
This sounds like something that probably should be a GitHub ticket. But yeah, I think it's almost the other option is like we start with the simplest option, which is basically continuing how we go forward. And we haven't had requests for LTS releases, but also we only just cut 1.0. So like, that's a good question.
Yeah, this kind of came up in my mind, like as I was like, oh, now we're cutting 1.1, and especially with the SDK changes, like some people are going to keep the 1.0 SDK for potentially forever, right? Like how long are we going to tell them that that's okay? If we find a security problem, how far do we backport it, right? And these are not really questions we had to tackle before. We don't have to, like I said, we don't have to answer them now, but I wanted to put it sort of on everybody's mind. I will file a GitHub issue. We can sort of continue the discussion there.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's a question of like, what do we backboard? Is it just security fixes? Is it just like what like P0 bugs? Yes, P1 bugs maybe. You know, and that kind of stuff too.
Okay, so with that, we'll move to my next item, which is really an issue I filed against April, and I was going to poke her in a public setting to see if I could get her to commit to something, which is we have this new GitHub org. We have the Agones project within that org, and it's so tools like Prow, but also just like using the GitHub interface. Like you can't assign issues to people that are not part of the org. Prow complains vociferously if people are not part of the org, if you try to assign them, or if they try to LGTM something, all those sorts of things. You can't, Prow complains if you try to set something in an owner's file that's not part of the org, it marks the PR as invalid owner's file. And I think even if we're not using the owner's files for automatic merging, which I have later on the list, they're still really useful for blunderbussing. So for sort of automatically assigning PRs to people that have specific areas of specialty, right? So like, every time I write something in Node, I manually assign it to Steve, and I poke him until he has a chance to look at it. But the tooling can do that for us automatically if we just say like, hey, Steve knows what he's doing for Node.js. If there's a PR, just assign it to him, right? And then we don't have to do it by ourselves. But that doesn't work unless Steve is a member of the org or the project, right? And so this is sort of a question I think mostly for April is, are there any sort of like legal or other issues like blocking us from just adding people to the org? And assuming that the answer is no, right now we have a process that's documented for how to become an approver. And what I feel like is we need a process for how to become an org member, which is sort of a much lighter weight version of that. So that we can, not just add people willy-nilly, but have people sort of meet some minimum bar. I think certainly things like having two-factor auth turned on for GitHub is part of that bar. But then once we add you to the org, we can do things like have that be part of the promotion process to become an owner for part of the code, and make it easy for people to LGTM and get stuff assigned to them.
Does it have to be the org, or could it just be the repo?
I think it can be either.
Okay.
The advantage of doing it at the org level is if we split stuff out into like a website to a separate repo, then you get both.
Which somebody promised me we would do past 1.0, but I don't want to name any names.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
So for the purposes, just so everybody knows, for the purposes of like administration of the GitHub org, yes, because the org is owned by Google, there are restrictions around who can be an admin in the org and who can have write access and all this other good stuff. But for the repo level, way easier. So Stephen, for instance, check your email. You should have an invite to be a contributor now. And what I was saying was, unless anyone has any objections or a thought about a better process, I'll just create an issue template. And those who want to be added as a contributor and are willing to have things assigned to them can just easily fill that out. And I think, like, Robbie said, two-factor auth makes total sense. You're going to start out with read access only, so I'm not so worried about that. But I think just as like a general practice, it's good to, get people down that path. And then to Robbie's point, like we can then that's like the first step. And then if we get to the point where we do want to have it be something where you're a reviewer, an approver, like we have a process for that. And then that's when your collaborator perms would change as well. So if that seems cool to everybody, it seems like a pretty easy starting point. And then, yeah, I mean, to your point, Robbie, about, like when we have our repo for the website and documentation, part of the reason why I like the idea of splitting the repo out is that you can do more of that granular. Wow, it's too early and I have not had my coffee. Although Timo still wins for earliest. You can give access, differently. So like, for instance, we might give in our dream world where we have someone that is super dedicated to docs, they would have, admin rights on that repo, but not on the core repo. So I like that functionality. But if that's cool with everybody, go ahead.
Well, you could also, even like if we manage to get a tech writer, you could say you're a collaborator on the website repo, but maybe not on the code repo, right? Like
Right,
that's
exactly.
Your specialty is doing that, right? And
yeah,
and that also gives sort of a separate promotion process for things that are separate.
Yep.
So I think that's perfectly fine. It's a little bit more overhead for people that are doing both to add them in both places, but I think that's reasonable, sort of at the scale we're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you know, when we hit Kubernetes scale, we'll try to get more, you know, bots and stuff in there. But I think for now, we can handle it. But yes, do poke me incessantly about anything assigned to me in GitHub, because I don't live in it quite like you guys do. So, and I need to get better about that. I know, but
yeah, it sounds like someone, maybe me or somebody, we should start a ticket, basically like what's our strategy for splitting stuff out, and how do we want to split stuff out, and which pieces do we want to split out where, because that has implications both at the organizational level and then like at the CI level and that kind of stuff too. So maybe I'll take an action item to do that.
yeah, I mean, the only thing I think we split now is just docs, because to me, there's a pretty simple reason for that. And I think you also mentioned like it would also make builds go faster. But I mean, kind of like OpenMatch now has an ecosystem repo for other stuff. I don't think we're at that point yet, but that is a model we could consider down the road.
Yeah, I just figure if we're having the conversation, might as well have the conversation with an end goal. Maybe we don't do it all at once, but then like let's have a plan, rather than maybe not do it organically. Because maybe there is like, if we're going to do that work to start to split apart our build system and all that kind of stuff and all those sort of things, then maybe it makes sense to do it a very particular way, just because it can be easier to do up front than rather than try and roll it through all the way through.
Cool.
Yeah, I think we can discuss this more on the ticket, but one thing we talked before about splitting out was SDKs. And I think on the one hand, having them in the main repo sort of makes things a lot easier, and we can kind of test them all together. But it might be nice to have a home for other SDKs that are maybe more, I would say, community supported instead of project supported. Although maybe there's not a huge difference. But like, if somebody felt a ticket like, I would like a Java SDK, here's a PR. Like if we could say, you can put it in your own repo, you are an owner of that repo, right? Then it doesn't have to get cut on the same release schedule as the main stuff. If it sort of falls into disrepair, we can sort of close that off separately. It can have its own docs, right? Like it can have a sort of a separate lifecycle and maintenance model, right? And we can sort of almost have like right now we sort of have all of the SDKs are sort of first class, if you will, but they don't all have the same feature set. They don't all have the same level of maintenance, right? Like there are people who are actively maintaining some of them, and other ones are both not up to the feature set that we would expect, and also aren't sort of being maintained at the same level either, right? So to me, that's an area where we should definitely have a discussion about where those belong.
Yeah, that's kind of what other projects do, and OpenMatch just started with. That is what the ecosystem repo essentially is. Here's cool stuff that happens. Well, I know like Cyril even is using the gRPC ecosystem repo, and that's the exact same thing of like, here's cool stuff that we may or may not support. Somebody else created, good luck. So yeah, I think there's definitely a precedent for that for sure. Okay, so the two things that I had we can do relatively quickly. One is if you're coming to KubeCon, which is less than a month away at this point, sign up for our workshop. We do have a workshop the Monday afternoon before the conference starts, and you can meet us in person, which, how awesome is that? And get stickers, which we know stickers is the real motivator there. Not for you, for everyone else, but not for you.
Seems reasonable.
The schedule is saying that we need to pay a additional fee. Is that true?
Yeah. So there is. I will say it goes to a diversity fund. I will also say, if you need help with that, just let me know. And then later in private, I can tell you my personal thoughts and feelings about them charging a fee for this. But yeah, so I don't want that to be the stop for anyone. So we can get you around that. And if you've already registered for KubeCon, just to make it that much more difficult, you'll have to like go back and then add this in So it's almost like you have to re-reg. So it's a hassle. But you could also just show up day of and we can work it out. So if you're, coming to San Diego but aren't sure what your schedule looks like, you have flexibility there. Because I know some people, you may not want to pay the $50 fee if you're not 100% sure you're going to be there. So either way, if you have questions, please reach out. But yeah, it's going to be a good workshop. We're going to have Agones, open match, all the other good stuff there. And it should be fun. And then Robbie has a talk shortly thereafter, one of the lightning talks. So it's a good way to start off the KubeCon experience.
Cyril, does that mean you're coming to KubeCon?
I'm going to the KubeCon, yeah.
Anyone else coming? No. Okay.
I wasn't going to this workshop. I don't work for a gaming company anymore, so it's going to be difficult to get those this fee covered by my company.
Yeah, we got you covered. Don't worry.
I don't know. I don't know if we allow other founding members to come do workshops for free.
I was going to say, like, you kind of have earned your right to be there. So.
Yeah, I'll be also interested into the lightning talk. What is it about, Robert?
It's about open match. So Mark gave a talk last year about Agones. So we weren't sure if there was enough new to get a talk accepted about that, but there hadn't been a talk about open match yet. And so the folks working on open match couldn't attend KubeCon, so I'm sort of giving a talk in their stead, even though I'm not a core open match contributor.
Cool.
And then we also have a kind of like meet the maintainers type session at basically the Google booth. Part of it is going to be a lounge area, and it's just kind of like a come hang out and say hi and talk. So that kind of is a good segue into the next thing on the agenda. Mark and I were looking at the calendar for the rest of the year, and the November date falls right in time for US Thanksgiving holiday, and it's also the week after KubeCon. And then, of course, December has its own unique challenges with scheduling. So we were taking a look at, just the rest of the year and wanted to see what folks thought about having, just kind of the informal meet face-to-face for folks that are going to be there when we're in KubeCon. Wouldn't be an official community meeting, but, would be something at least. And then maybe it sounded like maybe first week of December, just have a quick one to recap before the next release. And then we could call it for the year. And then the other question, as we go into next year, and we have more friends from Australia that are joining, was like, what time should we have this meeting at? It's currently 9 a.m. Pacific. That works well for EMEA, not necessarily great for APAC. So unfortunately, there's not a time that works well for all three. We have yet to invent the wormhole that will make that happen. But I was thinking perhaps we could alternate every other month. One be, our 9 a.m. time, and then the next month it's later in the day in California, and then it's later in the day for Australia. So that's kind of my thought. I don't know if anybody has any strong feelings, or if you just, maybe you're, on this call now and you're like, this time actually really sucks and I don't like it at all. So thoughts, opinions, if any.
There's probably also people that are not on this call because this time does suck and they weren't willing to get up at 3 in the morning.
Right.
That might have,
which is why that's why I think it's good to have, the alternation. Just because there's nothing that's going to work for everybody. But if we started, we could start it in January and see what works for folks. We can always modify it as it goes on, but basically I wanted to get kind of a informal thumbs up from folks for one, not having a virtual meeting in November, and then moving up the one in December. And then we can start in 2020, which, wow, 2020 is already here. Where are my flying cars?
What's your proposed date for December? Because you said around the release, and looks like the release candidate is December 3rd, and the release is the 10th. So you're thinking like Thursday the 5th? Like this meeting is kind of between the two. That would be that one.
Yeah, I think that's what Mark had said was the 5th. I'm looking to Mark for confirmation. The great thing is I ask Mark stuff and it starts a coughing fit. It's really fun.
Does. This is me getting better too.
Yeah.
So we do technically have one in the calendar already on the 28th.
Right, which is
November,
not.
Which is the middle of Thanksgiving. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So someone was clearly not listening.
No, I was coughing into my hands. Or I'm just reiterating so that everyone else understands.
Oh, right.
I just want to make sure that everyone understands. Yeah. 5th.
Yeah, so I mean, the 5th, I think Mark said that because same way you were thinking, Robbie, like it's the Thursday.
It's also right between the release candidate and the stable release, so like meh. It would be nice to have a meeting just to round out the year. We could also do the 12th, like after the actual release, and just be like, here's our wrap up for the year. Thank you everyone for all their work, sort of thing.
Yeah, I default to earlier usually just because December does tend to be a little...
Seems legit.
It's weird now that KubeCon's in November. It used to be KubeCon was the first week of December, and then we would all check out after that. But now they've changed it. So, yeah. I vote for the 5th.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay. All right, Robbie, floor is yours now.
All right. So I was going through a couple issues that I thought might be worth bringing up. Mess and Open issue 1109, which I linked in the notes, where basically he's saying that the default resync period for the Agones controller is too low, and that we're basically reconciling the entire world every 30 seconds, which is too fast because we should be catching things as they change, and we shouldn't actually need to go back and reconcile the whole world very frequently. And that at larger scales, this starts to be a problem because we're doing it so fast that we actually can't keep up when we try to reconcile the entire world every 30 seconds. And he proposed that the period should be something bigger than an hour. When I put this on the agenda, nobody had commented, but it looks like Mark said something yesterday after I'd added to the agenda, which I will then read into the meeting recording, which is wondering whether this is an actual problem. And I think that the problem showed up, Messam linked to issue 1107. We've been doing some sort of scale testing. I think Yarrick and Ilker had been doing some scale testing. And Yarrick, I think, opened an issue and sent a PR to fix one issue, but sort of the scale testing had sort of made us realize that this might be a sort of another issue as well. I saw Ilker on the line earlier. I think he's still there. Ilker, do you have any other context about the testing that was happening here that led to this? Ilker is maybe on the line.
Ilker's not listening. Yeah, I'd love to, from my comments here, I'd love to know more here about like what the actual like this sounds like it potentially like could be a problem more for game servers than for anything else, but I don't know. Also, if the controller goes down, waiting an hour for everything to self-heal when it comes back up seems like a long time. So like there's like trade-offs here. Sorry, Ilker, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, sorry, I was on a different machine and mic isn't working there. So yeah, we were running some tests, and then we were creating a lot of fleets on the cluster, and also on a bunch of namespaces. So, and we were also making the change on the scaling and the configurations on the fleet. So in an hour, maybe a couple times, basically the fleet was scaling up and down. So it's asking the Agones to do something about it. And that's basically when the fleet number goes over 200, then that basically starts causing issues on the Agones. It takes, we were expecting the response to, 30 seconds or a minute at most, that Agones react to this fleet, the scaling change, and then scale up or down the changes. But it was even going beyond 5-10 minutes. Still, it wasn't responding. So because the queue seems to be going in very like getting bigger and bigger. So I think there was a exponential back off on the queues, and it's meant for when there's a failure, not to keep on retrying and then but exponentially just trying it in in the next 5 milliseconds, 15 to up to 5 minutes. But what was happening is sometimes you make a change and it has to basically come back again, but there was no failure, just to check it. So it was also going exponentially. So because of a multiple changes, queue was going into huge depth, and the number of the messages. So we kind of changed that one. If there is no error, but it's still not happened, we just basically have a shorter, like a back-off time rather than a longer back-off time. So that solved the issue. It was a similar thing in the game server set. I think that was, fixed earlier or just set up the earlier, but we didn't have this much of change on the autoscaler and the fleet. So that change basically also we applied there too. That took away the problem basically. So since that, I think now we have more than 300, fleets, but it's still working fine, no issues. So I mean, that seems to solve the issue basically.
So Yark's change solved the immediate issue, and Messam's issue that he opened was more of a, maybe this would be a sort of another way to solve it maybe more generally, because we might run into other cases where we see weird interactions like this, and just lowering the default resync period might fix it.
Yeah.
Mark, to your initial point.
All right, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll say to Mark's initial point about like not wanting to wait an hour if the controller crashes, it comes back up. Can't we convince it like on startup, reconcile the world immediately, and then do your resync period of an hour? Like that seems like that should be the behavior. You shouldn't be waiting the default resync period on startup, right?
Yeah, I think that's that's a resync period. Like you shouldn't wait when you start up. But I actually had a discussion when I was doing my load tests. I mean, I think around February, March timeframe. So I actually play with that resync period. I think that's when you have a lot of allocations happening. So allocation, they may not catch up what's happening because the game server is allocated, but the allocator service doesn't know that. If you make that time even 5 minutes, and then it's basically do not really able to handle the allocations. So in this test, I mean, like we don't surface it yet, or we don't have a high volume constantly allocating it. So I think that change might help in this particular problem about the fleets, because the fleets are changing like slowly, because we were changing the fleet scaling every few times an hour, which is, I think that will change, it'll eventually sync. But if you have a burst of allocations happening, and maybe 100 allocations per second, having that basically instead of 30 seconds, but an hour, your allocations will basically will not work as we expected, or the performance will basically degrade. So that's tuning may not work for high frequency basic allocation. So maybe I think we separated the allocation service since then, I believe, right? It's a separate service, so maybe we can have a separate refresh time for allocation versus separate refresh time for the fleet autoscaler.
Well, allocations don't have refresh times. That's not a thing they do. Game servers themselves have refresh.
The game servers, but like into the Kubernetes refresh or CRDs. Like we were doing CRD on the Agones. We just removed that. We don't have any more game server allocator CRD. Maybe this might work now because we are not necessarily requiring, but we still need the game servers with their CRD, because if we don't get the update on the Kubernetes, then we don't know if there are any game servers available.
Yep.
Then basically we will not respond any requests. We will think that they are not there, although they are. So I think we have to go back and see changing this parameter, because it was a quite different version we have by back then. It was almost 6 more months ago. I mean, I think that's worth investigating, and maybe increasing time and try to do a load test on the allocation, see if the system is behaving better. But yeah, I tried to increase it, but I didn't get a good performance. I even tried to make it in 5 minutes, not in an hour.
Yeah.
Still, like the allocations that because I was able to allocate all 10,000 game servers in less than 2 minutes. So it's a 5-minute allocation, like a refresh time it doesn't really have basically. But
I also wonder.
Yeah.
I also wonder, like, I'm actually quite curious as to why like fleets were going so much into back off. In theory, they should just flow through sync and like be like, there's nothing there done. Like it should be almost instantaneous in some new ways.
Yeah, good question.
200 fleets to go through on a no-op should not take a long time. Like that feels like a different issue.
Yeah, so no-op is one thing, but we were changing to about 200 fleets, constantly like changing it. And I think that's eventually it wasn't able to keep up with those of changes basically. Because there were too many of them, and the exponential back off just keep on coming back, and then there are changes happening. I mean, we were reconciling for every 5 minutes, right? Every 5 minutes we were changing the settings.
Yeah, even then, that still
Even
seems.
then, I know this isn't supposed to happen, but it just gets into the state basically, and then we got out after we made this fix. Yep. I mean, there might be. I mean, we might fix it in a different solution, but maybe there might be something more going on. Maybe requires a second look.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, this looks like stuff while it happened while I was away, which is fair enough. Looks like you've basically changed how the the rate limiter works.
Yeah, yeah, we changed the rate limiter. Yeah, on the fleet and autoscaler, I think both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we will not necessarily probably push the Agones on the fleet side, so probably won't have 200 plus fleets for a given installation, but I think that's good that we kind of even if we get there. I mean, this problem might I mean, I think this problem is surfaced in a matter of like 15-20 minutes when you have 200 fleets. Maybe this real problem will surface in maybe a few fleets in 6 months if you don't shut down the Agones for 6 months, for instance. But we kind of expedite the simulation, so people might have problem after 6 months, they bounce it and then they will not see it. But now we kind of, I think, hopefully make it more robust, I guess.
In the interim time, I'm going to put a bow on this one and say the solution for now is not to change the period. We'll sort of leave this open as a low priority issue and see about doing some scale testing and see if we want to change it in the future.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, we should definitely come back. Yeah.
Okay, cool. The next thing I had on the list was a discussion about ownership for the repo. I sent a PR to move a couple of the Google folks to be an emeritus owner, which is sort of a weird concept. But I introduced owners files into the repo, which is something that Prow looks at for things like blunderbuss. And if you're listed as an owner, that means you get pull requests automatically assigned to you for review. We have quite a few folks that are sort of owners because they've been around for a long time that aren't as active on the project these days. And Prow has a notion of sort of a no-op field, if you will, but it's still there for documentation purposes called emeritus owners. And the idea is that you can move people there if they are no longer active, because that improves the contributor experience, because then PRs get assigned to people that will actually come look at them. But it leaves them sort of documented as if you want to go find somebody who probably knows what they're talking about, here's some extra names you can go try to track down. Practically, Ilker asked on the PR, but practically this has zero effect today because right now we're still doing manual merges, and anyone that has repo write access can both approve and do manual merges. So it has no effect on being able to merge or review right now, but it would have an effect on the blunderbuss part of Prow in terms of assigning things. It also made me realize that we have documentation about how to become an approver on the project, but we don't really have, and we have some expectations for what happens when you are an approver, but we don't really have the way out, right? When it's time to move along from the project, and how to sort of gracefully say, this is not my highest priority right now. I don't really want to be an approver anymore, but I want to be recognized for the fact that I have been an approver. So it would be nice, I think, to get this PR merged. And Ilker, if you would like to stay as an approver, that's fine with me. But both Joseph and Yarek are not super active at the moment. I think it would be nice not to have PRs automatically assigned to them if they're not going to take a look at them. And then, I only did it for the Googlers to start because I tend to know what those people are working on. But if there are other people that are listed as owners that would prefer not to have PRs assigned to them, then we can also move other people into this list as well.
Quick couple questions. So you're saying that we can, like, people with the emeritus like list, or they can still approve it, right? If they have. So
yes. So right now the way the pull request model works is anybody with write access to the repo can approve and merge. So the next thing I have on the list is, should we keep that, or do we want to have Prow do merges for us, right? And the advantage of having Prow do merges for us is that we don't have to go and poke the rebase button and merge button any longer and do that. Prow will just do it for us. And then it also means that you don't actually have to give people write access to the repo to allow them to get code in, right? Because all you need to get code in is to have the PRs LGTM then approved, and you can give people the ability to approve via owners files, right? So the promotion process doesn't require the full GitHub permission model. It only requires sort of a simpler permission model based on text files in the repo, which is really great for Kubernetes because they're a huge scale and they don't want to have tons and tons of people have write access to the repo. We're not really at the scale where that sort of thing is a problem. But I think that reducing the toil of having to click I've got 4 PRs I want to get in. I have to merge one, rebase the next one, merge that one, rebase the next one, merge that one. And I have to wait half an hour between each one, which is kind of annoying, right? If I want to get a batch of them in.
How would that work with our current CI system with Prow? Because Prow's not running our CI yet.
Yes. So I talked to Eric a little while back, and he said, and we'd have to double check that this is true, but I think Prow will make sure all the little green checks are ticked for the PR before it merges.
So the idea there being that the way it is now, we've merged master, so we know that it works with the current code base, whereas Prow would get around that.
So what Prow would do is Prow, I think, will automatically rebase so that it can merge, but it won't do that unless the CI and CLA check boxes are ticked. So I think what you're saying is what you'd miss is right now you click the rebase button and we rerun the tests against master. And so we would probably lose that, which might be enough of a blocker that we don't want to do this right now. I hadn't thought through that.
Yeah. Whereas Prow is doing our CI, it would basically do that for us anyway, wouldn't it? Because it like mushes all two things together and then runs all the tests.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, maybe that's enough of an issue. I mean, I think if Prow can't rebase cleanly, then it wouldn't merge. And in a lot of cases, PRs are non-conflicting. But there are definitely cases where this could end up breaking our tests.
Yeah, one other question. So what's the process for somebody from Emeritus to come back and become an approver again? So it's just, is that process defined as well?
I would say it's send a PR. I mean, I think, again, we don't have a process of moving from approver to emeritus. We don't have a process of moving back to approver either, right?
But
so I think
you can just send a PR and then everyone become active and you just move them.
Yeah, you could send a PR and we could have the discussion based off that PR. I think right now the official process of becoming an approver is opening a ticket, right? And this could also change that process of becoming an approver to PR instead of ticket, right? Because you PR yourself into the owner's file effectively.
Yeah, we just need to update the community membership guides as well to update to that.
All right.
Yeah.
And I've run us slightly over our clock in terms of when the meeting was supposed to end.
Okay.
So April, I don't know, do you want to wrap us up and remind people about the next meeting time?
I was gonna say, people can drop if they need to, but by all means, we can keep the conversation going. But yeah, I put in the notes. We'll have our next online meeting on December 5th, and I'll send out the new calendar invite and all that good stuff. But yeah, y'all keep talking. That's unless somebody absolutely needs to leave. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Sweet.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you.
We're so excited to see you soon.
Yeah, see you in QCon.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.